This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
Theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
Significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. You may have heard the television promos NBC does that go something like this. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press, a reminder to tune into the network's flagship talk show. Well, around here at Political Theater, we've got a similar saying. If it's September, it's government meltdown time. Under the best of circumstances, September is a stressful time around Washington. Congress, for the most part, never passes its spending bills on time for the September 30th end of the fiscal year. They also leave themselves little time for the rest of the month to resolve any differences, putting everyone on government shutdown alert on a regular basis. So it's always stressful in September. And now House Republicans have decided to make things even more difficult to manage by opening up an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden, which, regardless of which side of the aisle or building one is on, will suck up a lot of political oxygen. These two issues, a potential government shutdown and another presidential impeachment inquiry, the third in 4 years, will likely affect the 2024 campaign cycle, which is a great segue to welcoming our guest. We're going to discuss these topics with our colleague Nathan Gonzales, Roll Call's campaign analyst and the publisher of Inside Elections, as well as another wild card on the congressional elections next year, Redistricting. Nathan, welcome to Political Theater.
Jason, always a pleasure. Anytime you call, I will pick up the phone. I only text everybody else, but I will
okay,
answer
I was
your
going to say, like, that sounds, it's very grandparenty of you to actually pick up the phone.
I'm getting old. That's not a secret. So I'll embrace it.
I might add that this is a big moment for political theater history. This is not just our 299th episode of Political Theater, but this is our first video episode as well. And so we are maybe latecomers, but we hope that this is something where people can catch up to us. And I think that, given all my guests, you are absolutely the most appropriate person to help usher in this new era of political theater. I'm super glad that you agreed to come on today.
Naturally, I'm so glad, Jason, that when you thought, let's go video, who is the first person we should have on video? And I came to mind. So I really feel privileged by that.
I will say, I mean, confession, like Margot Robbie did, she did turn us down. So, take that as it will. I mean, I hope that doesn't hurt your feelings too much.
It's all right. It wouldn't be the first time.
Okay. That you've been, you've slotted in for Margot Robbie?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
Good. I mean, I think also before we get to the very serious issues of impeachment, shutdowns, the 2024 election, redistricting, we should talk just a little bit, because this is now a video medium as well, about our fashion choices. So, I mean, this, for anyone who knows me, they knows that this is not just an homage to the late, great Jimmy Buffett, but this is the kind of clothing I wear all the time. This is an Aloha shirt from Ren Spooner. It is business casual in Hawaii, at least. And so I stick to that here in DC. But Nathan, talk about your T-shirt, because I, as you pointed out in our off-mic moment, I did not know what Blue Harvest was, and it's an amazing T-shirt.
So Blue Harvest was the fake name created when Return of the Jedi was being filmed. They were trying to throw people off the tracks of the other two movies, people that might be interested. So Blue Harvest, the subtitle was Horror Beyond Imagination, which later we didn't know would be identified as the prequels. So I'm decided to make a statement, I guess, today with my Blue Harvest shirt.
And horror beyond the imagination, that could be like the prospect of listening to several episodes of Political Theater all at once.
Correct. It all works together.
So it's the tagline for a successful podcast. And also, I might point out too that even though I didn't know Blue Harvest, I also know that up until the last moment, for the most part, it was Revenge of the Jedi that was going to be the title. And then George Lucas and other people say, but Jedi shouldn't want to get revenge. So let's just talk about Return. It's a very positive moment, for the Star Wars universe.
And little do we know, it might have been the end of the best. We could also talk about. I realized that my Star Wars Episode 1 action figures this summer, I found out they were worth basically nothing.
Yep,
But
yep.
we'll save that for later.
Yeah, not unless they're in the box, and at that point, even then they're not.
Yeah, still not worth anything. They were worth my sons opening them up and playing with them 25 years after I bought them.
Yep, that's pretty much all they are. They're just there for they're tactile things, right? So here it is. We are recording this on September 12th. The House was scheduled to come in at noon. They did not even make it to the official gaveling back in from their several weeks long August recess before Kevin McCarthy went to the rotunda and announced that there was going to be an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. This is kind of widely seen as McCarthy having struck a deal with the House Freedom Caucus. In any of them, part of the deal of him becoming Speaker earlier this year was that there was a lower threshold for them to force votes to oust him. Part of the deal in getting him elected Speaker, and so whether this was a direct quid pro quo, we don't know. It seems that McCarthy could have announced something like this at any point over the summer, knowing where this was going, but he chose this moment. And then a few moments later, a little over an hour later, Matt Gaetz, one of his primary antagonists in the House Freedom Caucus, announced that if he were to bring a continuing resolution to the House floor to fund government past September 30th, that he would force these votes to oust McCarthy, maybe even on a daily basis. So it doesn't seem like it seems like these two issues are tracking simultaneously: the impeachment inquiry, the shutdown. And from your perspective, as someone who studies elections and the things that influence our campaigns, let's take them one at a time. Let's take the impeachment inquiry. We're over a year out from the 2024 election. We do have some elections in the fall in Virginia and Kentucky and so forth, Louisiana. But let's talk about the 2024 election and what the effect this might have.
Well, first, I think we're headed for an inquiry. We'll see if McCarthy ends up having the votes for impeachment, but I think we are seeing and feeling a very emboldened House majority. And the reason why I believe that we're headed at least for the inquiry is because we're hearing it from the top down. I just read releases from Tom Emmer, Elise Stefanik. These are not the Freedom Caucus, group. These are members of the Republican leadership team that are calling for this inquiry. Republicans, I think, feel a responsibility to use their investigative power as the majority, and there's probably a little bit of revenge and retribution because of what happened with President Trump. I am not equating these things. I'm just saying that I think there's some of that mindset within the Republican Party, and I don't feel a fear from Republicans that they will be penalized in 2024. I don't think they're thinking about, well, what if this is the mid 90s again with House Republicans and Newt Gingrich and President Bill Clinton. I don't really get that sense at all. The feeling is I'm getting from Republicans is that the more they can drive down President Biden, the trust in President Biden and his job approval rating, the better off they're going to be up and down the ballot in 2024.
Now, I mean, obviously McCarthy, he's got his perspective on that, which is, I think, largely tracks with what you just said, and his leadership team, Tom Emmer, Elise Stefanik, Steve Scalise, I'm guessing right down the line. However, they have a very slim majority. They have five seats to spare. So the leadership, is in tune with the Freedom Caucus because they know that that this is the drill. But what does Mike Lawler in New York think? What does Mike Garcia in California think? These are the people who make the majority for the Republicans. Matt Gaetz is not in any danger whatsoever, to be defeated in a primary or in a general election in Florida. But Lawler is a freshman. Garcia has run a couple of close races. These are the types where the majority is made, and I can't help but think that they would rather be talking about much more like bread and butter issues like
Sure,
veterans and, more ships for the military and more funding for cops, in the village hamlet and so forth, or in an Orange County. Isn't that where the risk is, in term, because the margins are so small at this point?
Absolutely. Yeah. It is not clear that Republicans have the votes to go beyond the inquiry and to actually impeach on the House side. I Republicans believe, that they can do multiple things at one time, right? They can have an inquiry into Biden and the entire family, and they can also talk about the economy, crime, the border, immigration, all the things they want to talk about. What they might be underestimating is us as members of the media and our ability to cover two things at one time. And if there's a public congressional inquiry on Biden going on with testimony, and there's a press conference by a Republican member on the border, like which one is the media going to cover? Of course, they're going to cover the hearing or the inquiry. And so Republicans risk looking out of touch or losing focus on some of those economic issues or security issues if they look overly focused on Hunter Biden and the entire Biden family.
And we also might note too that, I mean, I don't think we need to get necessarily into the multiple court cases against the former president Donald Trump, but that will also compete for a lot of airtime as well. And so, if you're a news director or an editor in chief or a political, correspondent, there are, as you said, only so many things you can, you can pay attention to if you've got this, almost like OJ trial kind of situation going on in Georgia, and then you've got two trials in DC and one in New York. That's a lot to keep track of. And then on top of that, an impeachment inquiry. Yes, I agree with you. I don't think that they're going to get a lot of traction necessarily from, when Mitch McConnell says, Democratic, mayors are soft on crime and which is, part of his leadership repertoire. He would like to keep that the focus on those sort of issues, because he knows that that's where Democrats probably have some real vulnerabilities, particularly in red states for the Senate.
It's kind of a be careful what you wish for, right? I think they're going to go forward with an inquiry, and they say, well, why does the media only want to talk about the inquiry? Like, well, you guys are the ones that started this. And we should say that part of it should depend on what comes out of this, right? I mean, what is revealed or unveiled that maybe the public doesn't know? That could have an impact either way. If it kind of comes up empty and it looks like a kind of a loose collection of data, or if there's something substantive that they find. I think we need to be open-minded about the outcome of what an investigation or inquiry reveals and how it could impact 2024 as well.
And I will say, to handicap that a little bit too, it seems like, it's not as if the folks at the House Judiciary Committee and Oversight Committee and Ways and Means have been sitting on their hands in this. They've been spending a lot of time, trying to turn up some dirt on the Bidens. And what they have, like McCarthy kind of got into that in his press conference, what they have is, as I think as you called it, a sort of a loose collection of anecdotes that seem kind of weird and shady, but it's not, it doesn't seem like there's a ton there at this point. Now, later on this month, prosecutors say that they will charge Hunter Biden, the president's son, probably on a gun charge. That is, probably not going to factor into the.
I don't think Hunter Biden's going to get elected president. I'm going to come out and say it right now.
But it just seems like the risk on it is that the more they look, and the more this is, people are asking questions, and the less it brings up, the more fatigue can set in too, and that's where people get a little antsy. I mean, I'm loath to say this is what the effect of the two Trump impeachments, were, and this is what the effect of the Clinton impeachment was, and the Nixon, impeachment. I mean, Nixon might as well have been the Nixon impeachment inquiry, which didn't even come up for a vote on the House floor, or the inquiry did, but the articles of impeachment didn't come up because he resigned. That feels like it could have been 100,000 years ago. So I think that we kind of, I think we relegate ourselves to talking about Clinton and Trump and now Biden. But it's not entirely clear. what some of the effects of this are. I mean, certainly we can look at how they did in the next election, but it's a wild card. If sorry to use that again. You talked about that with redistricting in the intro, but it seems like it is not obvious where this is heading and what the political effect will be.
Right. And it will be some of the deals that we believe Speaker McCarthy made. We're not sure about the details, right? I mean, how long did he promise a certain amount of time for this to go on, or was there a vote promised, or does this carry on for a few weeks and then sort of they move on to other things that they want to talk about? I don't know. I'm supposed to know, I guess, but there's a lot of it is not clear.
Hey, you got a Blue Harvest T-shirt on. It's just shoot from the hip on this show.
Now people are watching; they're not just listening; they're watching. There's a lot of pressure here, Jason.
That's right. I've thought about this now because I'm seeing myself in the small little window. I was like, wow, I use a lot of hand gestures. So let's move on to the shutdown. The shutdown showdown, as our former colleague Steve Dennis used to say a lot. I think he probably still does say it. Hi, Steve, if you're listening or watching. We are frequently in the shutdown showdown. I don't know if CNN has started to put up its shutdown clocks yet. Usually they wait until the Ides of September to do such a thing. But it seems like, that's not new, that we are heading for, like preparations for a shutdown. What is new is that there doesn't seem to be anything that people can do to avoid it because of again, very small margins of error in the House. Senate Republicans are kind of on board with Senate Democrats and saying like, hey, look, we reported all of our bills. We're going to start considering them. We're going to pass them. This is the way you do this. Like, let's just fund the government. And, with the implicit understanding that there is at least this thought that Republicans typically get blamed for shutdowns, whether that is true or not, and who believes that is up for debate. But there is that perception, particularly even on Capitol Hill, that Republicans feel like they always get blamed for a shutdown, regardless, even if they're in the right. So we have this added flavor, where Matt Gaetz and the Freedom Caucus say that they could possibly even vote to oust McCarthy if he doesn't do exactly what they say, on appropriations. Is this something that the public can latch onto? Because I'm skeptical about it, but I also see that we're in kind of extraordinary times with all these wildfires. I mean, we've got a lot of things that we need to fund, right?
Yeah, well, we are headed for a shutdown. We're going to have a shutdown, basically, because the way things are structured, or the negotiations or argument is structured now, anything short of a shutdown would be considered surrender by House Republicans, or Republicans would consider that surrendering, that they didn't get anything out of the prospect. So they want to, come to Washington after recess, make a point. We have to remember that for many of them, any government shutting down is a positive, right? They want to limit the size, scope, and some government agencies altogether. So having it shut down for a period of time is not a big deal. And we have had shutdowns and the government or our country has not collapsed. So that decreases the urgency of a shutdown. Will a shutdown be a big factor in the 2024 election? I'm skeptical. We are going to have so many news developments happen between a shutdown and the November election. We've talked about a lot of them, maybe multiple trials, an impeachment inquiry and potential vote. Who knows? International
got a war
stories.
on still.
I mean, it's gonna. So I'm skeptical if we're talking about a shutdown in 2024, that's probably good news for Democrats. But I'm skeptical. But in that saying that could also embolden Republicans this fall to sort of drag things out or get what they want out of this process because they don't feel the political risk of a shutdown.
And should note that there have even with all of the threats, there haven't been that many shutdowns in the last few years. Of course, the last major one was in 2018. Republicans controlled all of government. They controlled the White House and the House and the Senate, and Trump still, was pushing for, it was largely a dispute over border security. The government shut down for a little over a month.
One of my favorite ones, though, was 2010, I believe. And that was Republicans kind of followed Ted Cruz
2013, actually.
into the shutdown. And then there was reports of after the shutdown, reports of a private meeting with senators. And I looked to Senator Cruz and said, all right, what's next? And
no idea.
No plan. But then Republicans were, though, set up to be blamed, but then there was the healthcare.gov rollout. So this was earlier, and the healthcare.gov web rollout was just a fiasco. I mean, It was a disaster, and it took all the news off of the shutdown and Republicans and onto the ineptness that was that initial website. So things happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'll note, in 2018, after the 2018 shutdown in January, Republicans lost the House by a lot. But then they gained a couple seats in the Senate, partially, that's part of like the way the map was. And as you said, in 2013, despite the government shutdown, Republicans took back the Senate in the 2014 elections and gained seats in the House. So, mixed message there. I mean, people talk a lot about the 1990s, 1995, 1996 shutdowns and how that helped Bill Clinton get reelected, and that, Republicans lost seats. Again, we're almost starting to get into ancient history, with the 1990s, as much as that pains me to say. I think the more recent government shutdowns are a little more indicative that we don't know what the effect will be. And some of it just depends on the map. I do think that shutdowns would have a different effect if things were actually shut down, if planes couldn't take off, if social security checks weren't mailed, if the military, couldn't gas up their tanks, I think that would change things immensely compared to the government shutdowns we have. And I'm not saying that to disparage anybody who is not getting, doesn't get paid afterwards, and how disruptive that can be for these partial government shutdowns. But if Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security stopped operating during a shutdown, I don't think that we would ever have a shutdown. Or if we did, the people who caused them would not have jobs for much longer.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the backlash would be more significant, or the risk would be higher, and thus the cost, the political stakes would be higher, and these members would think very differently about it if the impact were different.
Let's talk about redistricting now. We got some news earlier this week because Alabama has been in this standoff with the judiciary about its congressional maps. The Supreme Court found that the current map that they came up with after redistricting and put into place last year violated the Voting Rights Act. They were told they need to redraw it, particularly so that a minority, there could be another minority district that was at least in play. Alabama, the legislature and the governor said, no thanks. Largely,
well, they said 40% is pretty close to 50% or more, right? We were struggling with some math details in Alabama,
right? Yeah, math. Interesting, yet like slightly off on the calculations. So again, went to court again. Federal judges not particularly swayed by the Alabama legislature and governor. Said like special master gets to draw this map. Alabama Republicans have now asked the Supreme Court to intervene. So that's just one example of some redistricting foibles that we're keeping track of, because what we're talking about is one seat, although we shouldn't underestimate the value of one more seat.
Democrats need 5.
Democrats need 5. But we've got a potential redrawing in North Carolina, which is largely reflecting now its split personality as a swing state, with the congressional delegation that may be redrawn to favor Republicans again. Ohio is under an order that they need to redraw their maps to more accurately reflect the population and voting patterns. New York may have another thing. So this may have one of the biggest effects, but we just don't know at this point, right?
A lot of moving pieces, a lot of court cases. I think when we break it down, sitting here today, Alabama looks like it will be a +1 for Democrats. That decision probably does impact Louisiana, maybe Georgia, but it's really looking less likely that they will have new maps for 2024, maybe in the future. Republicans are going to redraw the maps in North Carolina. I would expect a +3 for Republicans in North Carolina. They were going to reach for 4, but the Supreme Court decision that impacted Alabama probably saved them from going after Don Davis's seat and kind of limiting what they tried to do there. New York, let's keep it with the wild card. We're heading into baseball off season, so let's just use wild card as much as possible. The wild card is New York. New York Republicans had a great 2022, picking up multiple seats. So they have multiple vulnerable Republican incumbents, and just the way the map is now. But Democrats, there may still be a new map that makes a lot of those districts even a few points better for Democrats, making Republicans more vulnerable. So that would almost that could wash away any gains that Republicans take out of North Carolina and kind of be a net wash. But if New York stays the same, then on redistricting, Republicans could pick up a couple of seats. This cycle.
Yeah, it's enough to make your head hurt. So.
Yeah, and it's and we are getting closer. I mean, it depends on the state and the filing deadlines, but we are almost a year from the general election day. But we have to remember that states have to have primaries, and then before that, filing deadlines, and so the calendar starts to get a lot shorter as we creep closer to election day.
Yeah, and again, I kind of like I want to pick up on what you were saying about New York too. If there was not even the possibility of a redrawing of the maps to make some of these Republican pickup seats more Democratic, there's still the possibility that some of these Republicans would lose.
Right, yeah.
I mean, George Santos represents Long Island.
Correct.
Mike Lawler is in a very tough, evenly split district. I mean, a lot of those, Hudson Valley seats that went Republican, are under normal circumstances would be, possible Democratic pickups. So adding just a few more voters, from one side of the river or the next, is something that could definitely, just an added layer of complexity.
Yeah, and add in Anthony D'Esposito as well. But New York is one place where Democrats are very energized about running in a presidential year. They feel like turnout was depressed, or that they were hurt by Governor Kathy Hochul in 2022 up for re-election. She ended up winning, but her numbers were depressed in part because of effective Republican messaging on crime and violence.
Lee Zeldin was a good candidate too. I mean, he may have been the best candidate that they could have offered in a losing effort, and I think he did effectively get that message out. To even if he didn't win.
Right, and Democrats. So now, when we turn the page, Democrats are believing that 2024 in a presidential year is going to be much better. They believe California is going to be much better in a presidential year, where Governor Gavin Newsom won re-election, but his numbers were not where they wanted them to be. And so there are multiple vulnerable Republican members. And you mentioned Mike Lawler. Mike Lawler, not only one of the most vulnerable Republicans, but remember when Biden went out to near his district, it might have been just outside his district, and Democrats were fearful ahead of time that he might say something nice about Congressman Lawler, and guess what happened? He did. He said that he's not like those other Republicans. I mean, President Biden gave him a TV ad or a quote that he can use, but bringing it full circle to our first topic, what then it's going to be hard. Lawler has done a good job of cultivating this moderate image, but he is going to be faced with the reality. It could be faced with the reality of an impeachment vote. And if McCarthy, it seemed like it'd be tough for Lawler to make that vote and undo what he's already done. But that leaves McCarthy with, at least a fewer vote that he needs to actually pull through on this.
Yeah. Well, Nathan, I think we have a lot for ourselves and our listeners and viewers to chew on with impeachment, the shutdown, the impending shutdown, I should say. It hasn't happened yet, but just give it a little give it a couple weeks, folks. And redistricting, I think I'm just going to go and set up my viewing of Blue Harvest later on for tonight and call it an episode here.
It's a great way to kick off fall with Return of the Jedi and Shutdown and impeachment questions.
It's quite a double feature there.
It shows that we are not normal people, Jason. I think that's what that shows.
It does. Also, I would mention too that I'd be remiss in not directing our readers and viewers and subscribers and listeners to your work on rollcall.com. We will go up later on with your latest, which is about some governors' races, and particularly governors who are front runners who have some Hill connections, some Capitol Hill connections. So check that out. Even though we're out of time for that. That's another podcast, perhaps.
We have a lot more. This is only 299. There's plenty more to come.
But thank you very much for being a part of this. This moment in political theater history, Nathan. I appreciate it. I love your background. You gotta. It's real,
folks.
Yeah.
It's not fake. No, right. I honored that you every time you ask me to come on, anytime.
And thank you out there, listeners and viewers. If you have liked this podcast, please tell your friends about it. Rate us on iTunes. Leave some comments in the YouTube section, telling YouTube how much you love us. Let's get those algorithms working for us all. And we will see you next time here on Political Theater.